This podcast is brought to you by the Ultimate Lettering Quiz. Find out just how much you really know about letters by taking the quiz for free on martinaflor.com/quiz. Enjoy! Hello and welcome to another episode of Open Studio. I'm your host, Martina Flor, and in this show I have honest conversations with artists, designers, and creatives to uncover their story and the specific tactics they use to build a successful career around their skills and the work they love doing. My guest today is Jordan Metcalf. Jordan is a South African-born, Portland-based graphic designer, creative director, and artist. After over a decade of independently designing brands and exploring new ways to help tell stories through diverse and experimental lettering projects for clients like Nike, Apple, National Geographic, and others, he made the move to a full-time position in a brand studio in 2019 to focus on larger scale projects and collaborations. He currently spends his days as a creative director helping craft identities, spaces, and experiences for projects ranging from independent hotels to animation studios. He invests his free time getting dusty while trying to become a less amateur woodworker. In this conversation with Jordan, you will hear about his unique creative path that starts as a graphic designer for small studios to becoming one of the top lettering artists of our time and working alone to taking a different position in his professional life and joining a team. He shared how he found direction for his creative career by using experimentation and curiosity while staying humble and detached from his work. What I especially loved about this show is how Jordan steered the conversation toward other important aspects of a creative career, which have to do with solid values, honesty, and empathy for the people you work with and for. Enjoy this conversation with Jordan Metcalf. Hi, Jordan. How are you doing today? Thank you for coming on the show.
Hello, Martina. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat to you. I think we've spoken about this a bit before, but it feels like I've known your work for a really long time and never really met you in real life. So.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the things I love the most about the podcast is that I get to talk to people that I've been following for a long time, and suddenly we are just, sitting and chatting for an hour. And you have such a rich path as a creative, Jordan. And if my research is correct, because I always do research for my episodes, your journey starts as a graphic designer in South Africa. Then you saw success with typography and became one of the top lettering artists out there. And most recently, you have gone from working solo to become more of a creative director, like managing bigger projects in Portland, the US, right? And we will definitely dive deeper into the different aspects of your creative journey. But before that, I normally like to start with a strong question that will hopefully open a lot of different windows of conversation. And the question is, how does someone turn something they enjoy doing or they are interested in into their job or their main occupation? And imagine that an artist that is just starting is listening to this show, which is normally the case, really. And they love doing illustration or they love doing lettering or whatever it is that they love doing. And they want to do that full time and make a living of it. What would be some of the advice that you would give to someone that is just starting that will clear up their way or save them some of the struggle?
Wow, that's a huge question. Obviously, I think you and I are probably both aware that there's no silver bullet. Like, there's no one way to do it. There's no one way to success. So much of it about it is, if I'm being honest, it's probably luck and where you happen to be and the time you happen to be doing it in. But I think, especially now in the world, just with the internet, I think, it's so easy to show people the things you love and that you're good at. And I think people respond to that. We live in a world where I think everyone's kind of cynical. There's a lot of stuff that's not made with particular integrity or passion. And I think the world really does, or people, maybe not the world as large, but like people respond to that. People respond to something that feels honest and sort of and real and inspired by something someone loves. And I see this all the time. I think you and I, we exist in this world of digital arts and sort of commercial design work and that kind of stuff. But I mean, I love finding people that are just living in small towns who have been making a living carving cups for their whole life or whatever, and just like following something that they just love doing every day, and just putting it out there. And I think people see that. I think people respond to craft. So I would say firstly, maybe to step back, I would say anyone wanting to do what they love for money should also think about whether they really want to do what they love for money or whether they want to do it for love, because I think that can also have its consequences that you don't necessarily see in the short term. But I would say if you do see that as your path and your passion, I think the one way to do it is just to do it in a way that it feels real. Like I said a lot, I think we have this thing where I think Instagram requires us to make work in a certain way to be viewed and to be visible, and I think that's certainly not a path to it, honestly, because you end up just aggregating towards what I think gets the most hits, and that's not always what you're going to be good at or particularly uniquely bring to the world. So I don't know, I guess just doing the thing you love and doing it over and over again, and putting it in front of people and hoping they see it for what it is, and not for what the world has told you it needs to sort of curatedly be.
Yeah, there's so many things that I want to ask you about this, but I first want to touch on what you just mentioned, which is so true. First there's this question of whether you want to turn something you enjoy doing and you love, whether you really want to turn it into a job, because that has its consequences. And I wonder for those, but I also think that it makes sense for someone who is just studying and is really in love with what they do and they enjoy doing it, that they are looking forward to do that more and more, and to do it for a living, and to even get more projects that are exciting for them, right? So I totally understand, being one of those people who initially was in love with what they were doing and they turn that into a job. I can totally understand the motivation behind trying to turn something or a skill of yours or something you enjoy doing or a hobby into a full-time job, right? So I'm wondering what are some of the things that someone who wants to turn a skill or a hobby into a job, what are some of the things that they would need to have into account in order not to lose that spark and not to lose that enjoyment for that job, right? What are some of the things that you have done in your own path as an artist and designer?
Yeah, I think when I was, I think similarly to a lot of people who started out when I was starting out, I think a lot of it just came from discovery, and I think an enthusiasm to learn and figure things out and to make something new. And I think when I was doing a lot of lettering work, I think I kind of had this like no style or style approach, which I think is what kept me interested in it. I think every project I did, everything I took on, I really wanted to try something new and try something sort of to be a little inventive, and not necessarily to be for the purpose of innovation, but just I think make myself interested in it, and I think that's how I started out. Was really just it was experimental, figuring things out, learning something new, and getting excited by the results. And so, for me, I think I stayed excited about it and passionate about it because I felt like a lot of what I was doing, job to job, was something a little new, and I was kind of exploring something interesting and exploring something unique, and that's really what I was getting out of it a lot of the time, was just an end result that, when I was starting out, I couldn't necessarily have predicted what the results would be. And I know that's different for a lot of people. A lot of people take a bit more of a classic illustrator's approach to design, where they're really define a style and an identity that's very unique to them, and that's what they love doing. They love kind of they love bringing an aesthetic that they feel like they can own and sort of really embody, and that's kind of an approach, and I think that can be really valuable for people too. But I think maybe the main thing is finding the ways in which creating actually brings you joy. And that doesn't have to be universal for anyone. I think it's different for everyone, but I think that's the thing that keeps you excited about it. What is it about the process that you actually enjoy doing? What kind of work do you enjoy doing? What kind of people do you want to work for? What do you want to put into this world versus take out of it? I think those are all the big questions for me. I think it's really easy to get wrapped up in who pays the most money or just what's like the blue chip client, like everyone likes to talk about what's the dream job, but I think it's that I think should just be different for everyone. I think I guess that's the point really. It's just I don't think there's one way. It's really just figuring out what it is that motivates you and following that. And I think another part of that I've discovered is also I think taking stock, like over time. I think it's really easy to get almost wrapped up in it and the momentum of it, and sort of you start to get jobs and you get more jobs and then you're busy and then suddenly it's like 5-10 years later and you're like, wow, this isn't what I was expecting. And I think that's a gift, but I think it's important to also just take pause sometimes and go like, am I still enjoying this part of the job? Am I still excited about this? Is there stuff I want to like change or bring in new? What maybe is my new, I don't know, what is my biggest skill set now versus what it was 5 years ago? Just to make sure you're not just kind of getting swept along in a career.
That's so interesting. It's like making an audit of your own work and your own career, right? Have you ever done that for yourself? Have you ever, or have you gone through a couple of those?
I mean, every day. Yeah, I mean, this happened to me. And I think I'm saying this from at least my personal experience of lettering. I think particularly almost happened to me. I think we can get into the whole history of maybe how I got into that if you want, but I think I started out. We will. I just started out at a time when it wasn't really an established trend. So I was like early in the game, and so a lot of it was just like this, what felt like uncharted territory to some degree, and that luck of being there at that time meant that I just got so much work at the right time because I just happened to be there, whatever the thing was. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it feels like it sort of happened to me and I was excited to be there, but definitely there came a point where I was just like, I had to sort of pause and go like, hey, cool, like, am I still really enjoying this? Because again, when my particular work is really predicated on being experimental and having that enthusiasm for experimentation, when some of that enthusiasm dies down, it's a little harder to really bring your full energy and effort to things. And so I just think it's important. I think this sounds like trite, but I think we're also in a service industry. I think people are paying us to make work, and I always feel bad if someone's paying me and I'm not really delivering like the value that I think they're expecting. So for me, I don't want to like phone it home. I don't want to do it because it's easy and I know I can and someone likes it. And I guess I want to be bringing value if I'm going to be doing anything. And if I don't feel like I am, then I don't know. I guess I would rather not do it.
Yeah. Have you ever consciously taken the decision of like pivoting or taking a different direction, or was it more for you like a normal transition into something, or it was naturally happening? Because you mentioned all of these audits, which I think is really important to stop from time to time and understand whether and take a minute to see whether the things that you're doing are still bringing you joy, and if you're still really good at it, or you're just doing it because you're doing it. But what is the decision that comes after, right? If you have done this at some point in your career, did you made a conscious decision towards taking a different direction, or was this something more organic that happened in your life and in your path as a creative?
Yeah, I think it's kind of both, and I think it's an ongoing like internal discussion too. You know, I mean, I think the other part of this is, you know, you spend so long in one universe of work and creativity, and it's sort of sometimes a bit hard to see what you could or couldn't do completely outside of that, or if, you know, what that looks like. So, I mean, I think it's a bit of both. I think the transition happened a lot when I moved to the United States, and I just didn't have. I'd been in a shared studio space when I was in Cape Town, and I just was surrounded by friends and other creatives, and then when I moved over here, you know, the first year I was here, I was working and living in this apartment, and, you know, my wife was going to work, and suddenly I was kind of like just by myself all day, and then I was just like, it just gave me way more time, I think, to just really be like, am I actually really enjoying this work still, you know, and if I'm not, like what else is there, what else could I be doing, and I think I just started to feel like it wasn't bringing me as much joy, and I think a lot of what I'd loved, I think what had been filling in a lot of the spaces of joy for a little while had also just been community. Yeah. So the people I'd surrounded myself with before, and so I started to think, like, you know, really look at it and be like, what are the things I'm kind of missing, and you know, how do I get closer to those things within what I'm doing? And so, you know, I think when we're freelance and we work for ourselves, there's sort of this weird sense of that's immutable. It's like, oh gosh, I'm a freelancer, and that's how I define myself, and getting a job is like, feels like, I mean, I don't want to say this, everyone feels this, but you know, there's almost a weird sense of failure about the idea of trying to get a job, because you're like, oh, I should be freelancing though. Yeah. And it's not like I didn't have a successful freelance career, but it just started to become like there's other versions of this that could be just as interesting and, you know, new and challenging in different ways. And so I started to get more excited about the idea of like working in a studio and, you know, working with people in a team and doing bigger projects and doing things that I couldn't really do by myself. And I guess the other part of this is I also started to realize that the jobs I'd loved the most over my career had also been more branding focused, and not because I like inherently just building a brand or a logo. It was because it was more relationship based. You know, the freelance lettering world, a lot of it's like editorial or advertising, so it's like you're in there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks with someone, and then you never speak to them again. Whereas, you know, I'd had these really beautiful relationships with clients that had gone on for like 10 years where I'd done branding for them, and it was just such like a different feel and experience of helping someone build something much bigger. And so yeah, like I think that's where I started to get attracted to the idea of like going into a studio, working with a team, and then maybe working on more branding projects where it could be a bigger outcomes, more longer term kind of. I think things that would just last a bit longer, you know, that would still maybe be around in 5 years instead of, you know, as like all these things I think just coalesced, and I mean I could go on for a long time about this, but
no, and I think it's also really interesting that when you speak about the audit this audit, or I call it audit of your own career, that you did for yourself, you didn't only include, or you didn't only have into account the creative side of your work, but also, you know, who are you working with, who your clients are, who is the people that I interact with every day, right? Because this is also part of like enjoying your work and really feeling fulfilled by your by the work you do, right? But I want to go back a little bit and kind of like understand where you're coming from, and also I think our listeners will be really interested to know how did you ended up, you know, going down the path of illustration and creativity and graphic design. So I want to go back a little bit to your roots and understand, you know, how was your life growing up, and what does your family look like?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I love these conversations outside of, you know, I think of someone like you outside of the United States, because I think, you know, the industry is so homogenized by people who grew up in the US and studied at certain schools and, you know, got jobs in certain New York studios and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's amazing. But there's just this whole other world of people who came in such a different door. And I feel like that's kind of, you know, for me and for a lot of other people, I guess it's how it happens. So I mean, I grew up in Cape Town in South Africa. You know, like I think a lot of kids, like you know, my family didn't have that much money. We weren't like, you know, badly off, but we were just like, you know, normal family living in Cape Town in South Africa, very like a whole world away from any of this, and anything I could have ever kind of foreseen this becoming, I guess. But yeah, I think like a lot of kids, I think growing up, I wanted to do a lot of different things. I wanted to be a psychologist for a while. I really wanted to be like an architect. I wanted to do all these things, and funnily enough, like now my job is kind of talking a lot instead of designing a lot, so maybe psychology is kind of coming into it. But yeah, but I think I wanted to be an artist and a psychologist and all these things, but then I just had no idea, you know, and the world was really different then. I mean, I'm almost 40, so this was like pre-internet, you know. I couldn't just go online and like find the cool accounts of things I was inspired by and like download Photoshop and like learn stuff. So, you know, I went the old school route of just going to like one of those career council things where someone was just like, oh, you seem to be kind of good at this and this, you should look into graphic design. And I didn't even know what that was.
Whoa.
And so
that was a lucky shot. That was a lucky shot.
I know, it's crazy. It's almost like those things work.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then just to make a long story short, I took a bit of time off after school, but then I did actually just apply to this advertising school because that's all we had. We didn't have like fancy design schools. It was just like you could get a diploma in design from an ad kind of school. And I went there, and I think it was just, I think discovering, well, like I think consciously discovering design is where a lot of people who get into design get inspired, right? Where it's the stuff you've always seen your entire life, you've just literally never thought about it until someone points it out that like this is design, this is typography, this is like, you know, there's all these ways of thinking about these things and approaching them to do certain things and kind of create certain emotions. And so I think in college, it wasn't like a particularly comprehensive course, but I mean, we obviously looked at a bit of the stuff, but I think that's where I started to get really interested in typography generally. You know, I've always been someone who reads a lot and I talk a lot, and so yeah, I think just realizing, you know, kind of like starting to understand the power of typography as like a design tool got me really interested in it. So that was probably the origin story of that part of my journey. But then I didn't like formalize any of that for years. So I guess like fast forwarding, I got out of school and I didn't know what I wanted to do, because I think it was like, I knew there were lots of types of design, but it was kind of like, I don't know what kind of design I want to do. And so I did a few different jobs, and there were some wild ones in the beginning, but I kind of did some just kind of classic design work for this guy for a while and got a bit burnt out on that. And then I went and worked at like a web design studio for a bit. Because again, this is in South Africa, I guess there weren't, well, particularly in Cape Town, there weren't really big, like, cool design studios. You know, you could go work at like an advertising agency, or you could go work at like a web design studio, these kinds of things. But I feel like there weren't like really great like mix of just cool design and brand studios that you know now find all over the world, I guess.
Do you find, when you look back, do you find some value in having had those jobs back then, even when they were not really huge design studios or brand agencies?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. I tell like everyone, I think all like students, everyone should just get work before they go freelance, you know, even if that's your dream. I think you just learn so much and so much unexpected stuff. But I think what I did was, so I worked in this web design studio, and then I got so burnt out because it was also early days of web. When I say burnt out, I don't mean like physically burnt out, just I got tired of the jobs. But it was like early days of web, so you know, it was like opening up a Photoshop file and it was like 800 by 600. It was really bad, you know, like if you were lucky you could try to do some flash animation.
That was really advanced.
I know, it was amazing back then. But so then one of the things I got kind of into I think I started to see it was like the early days of like MK12 and these sorts of people, these animation studios that were coming out and doing sort of motion graphics. And so since like my third year of college, I've been kind of into this and I've been experimenting with it a bit. And so I got really into the idea of doing motion graphics. And so eventually I went and worked at this, at an animation studio. And then I was directing animated commercials. I was doing a whole lot of stuff. But I think what was happening like kind of quietly and percolating in the background was, to kind of learn how to use Illustrator better and just like have fun. I was doing a lot of artwork and doing shows and painting and doing all sorts of things as well as this working. But then one of the things I was doing within that realm was just like playing around in Illustrator and just I didn't feel like I was an illustrator in the sense of like creating characters and stuff. So I was like, I don't really know what I want to draw, so I'll just draw words because that's like easy, you can just find song lyrics that you like and then use Illustrator tools to like make them look cool. And so I started doing all of these little kind of type experiment things just to be like, it'd be kind of funny if, if I made this shape and then tried this, or like, made a line and then like offset that line like 20 times and then I had lots of lines, and if you do that with like things, you can form letters out of these crazy lines and they join, and it was really just like experimentation, just to learn the tools and to have fun, and so while working at this,
were you just a follow-up question, were you doing this on the side, like because you had all like this day job? I guess you were doing that in your free time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was in my early 20s. I had lots of energy back then. So yeah, I was doing this all on the side, and just as a way of, because the thing is, I enjoyed the jobs I was doing, but they weren't like, when you're young, particularly, I think you have a lot of like ideas and you're excited about creating stuff, and so I wasn't necessarily getting that from work. So part of this is also like I want to make stuff I'm getting excited about, and I was doing that on the side, like a lot of people do. So. It was really just experimenting, and I think there just came a point where I started to realize the stuff I was doing on the side was stuff that was really like exciting me. Yeah. And the stuff I was doing during the day wasn't so much, and there kind of came this point in that studio where I was like 26 or 25 or whatever, maybe a bit younger, 24, and it was kind of, I was almost going to become like a creative director kind of position in the studio, and it just felt a bit like I was like, I'm too young to like not be making stuff right now. I don't really want to just kind of, I don't know, it was just like this inflection point of choosing like, do I stay here and like that could be fine, but I'm probably not going to be able to do that much that I love, or do I kind of really take this moment now to try something and go out on my own. And I was lucky at the time, I just gotten together with my partner, and she was like doing well in her job, and so she was kind of like, cool, I'll support you if you want to try go freelance. And so anyway,
amazing. So another one, because I sorry to interrupt you, but it's so funny. I'm gonna connect with another episode that I recorded with Eric Marinovich, and he calls his wife his venture capitalist, because she was paying the bills while he was starting his career as a lettering artist, and now he is also pivoting into type design and starting his own type foundry, and again his wife comes to the rescue. So that it's always great to have someone to share life with, because things are easier in a way.
I mean,
I see that happening with you as well. Yeah, so much so.
Yeah, I mean, like Eric's a good friend of mine, but also, I think our situations are very similar. My wife and I have kind of flip-flopped in terms of who's kind of allowing the other one to kind of pursue something over the years, and it just works really well to be in a sort of supportive, healthy relationship where you can kind of just help each other do what you want to do and follow what you want to follow.
Shout out to good couples and to good partners, because they are such an essential part of like making it or to achieve some success in your own career, and they often go unnoticed, right? Like I always mention my husband as well in my journey as a lettering artist, because he was the one like helping me setting up my studio in Germany and dealing with all the the German bureaucracy and kind of also making some of the most important decisions when it comes to my business. It's always like the one person that I ask for advice. Sometimes I listen to him, sometimes not, but it's still there, a very important part of one's career. So yeah, it's definitely important to have like a partner that really to lean back on, or to count on. Sorry, so I interrupted you, and you were mentioning that you had this tipping point and you had a very supportive partner, and you wanted to pivot into something that you enjoyed doing, right?
Exactly. So I think, at that point I kind of was like, hey, let me try this freelance thing, and then I was kind of like, I'm just going to go ahead and like the only stuff I'm going to put on the internet, because it was like the early days of Behance, when Behance was first starting out, which was like a wild time. And so I was kind of like, I'm just going to put this stuff online and see what happens, because this is the stuff I'd like to be doing as a job, instead of maybe some of the stuff I'd been doing for these studios and these clients, right? So it's like, and so then I put all these weird little type experiment things on, and it was just so arbitrary looking back. But I mean, I guess it was just, again, it was sort of the early days of this, so it maybe is fine that it was just unconnected to clients or anything. But yeah, it was just, I put these little experiments online, and then because, again, I was lucky, it was just the right time with the early days of Behance. I think was, there were obviously a few of us. I think probably people like Eric were probably doing a similar thing at a similar time, like coming into this. And so it just was this kind of lucky situation of being there at the right time. And so the Behance thing, I got featured a couple times, which at that point too, there were less people, so it made it more visible. And, like a week or two into, I guess, putting the stuff online, like sitting in my little house in Cape Town, and, I got emails from people from like Nike and that kind of stuff, just saying, hey, we would love to pay you to just make some graphics for Nike. Like, and at the time it was like absurd. I was like, what are you talking about?
Is this spam or?
It's just like nothing I ever could have really predicted or imagined, would be the situation. And so I just was, again, I don't even think it was about me. It was just really just luck, and right time, right place kind of thing. And so, I think it all snowballed from there. I did some stuff for Nike, and it was really just like, their briefs were basically just like some pictures of my work plus a t-shirt and plus Nike or plus the swoosh, and it was basically just like, hey, do whatever you do, just like have fun, make some weird shit, and I mean, it's like a dream job, right? Like, especially when you're just starting out and you've never done this before. I'd never like, I didn't even know what to quote. They're like, oh, just send us a quote for what to, and I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, this is dollars. I sent some like amount to them as a quote, and the guy like immediately responds like, that's perfect. And I was like, oh, did I just like way under quote? Like, I don't know.
So how was the behind the scenes of that one first big assignment? Were you asking friends or colleagues how to do this, or were you even prepared to quote jobs? Were there really this really your first job, or the first job you were quoting? Because I can imagine that you were, you wanted to launch your freelance career as an artist or designer, and you were already like setting up the things, right? You had your website running, and you set up this Behance.
I don't think I had a website.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have a website. I had a Behance.
Were you doing client outreach or like connecting with some people and saying,
no,
hey? Okay,
dude, I knew nothing, and there was no social media, so I didn't have like Instagram. I think like Facebook had like just come out like a year before in South Africa. It was just like really.
It makes you sound really old.
I'm very, very old. But no, I didn't know any better, and I think also just being in Cape Town again, like I didn't have a huge network of people that I could just reach out to and be like, hey, cool, what do I do about this and this and this? A lot of it was just figuring it out as I went. And so I think I'd done before the Nike job, I'd done like one other international job for some like Belgian magazine who wanted, I forget what it's called, but like stereoscopic maybe. They wanted some typography that was done in that thing where you wear the little blue and red glasses and then it had dimensionality.
Yes.
So anyway, I think that was the only other thing I'd done. But no, a lot of it was just figuring it out. And I think, I think kind of honestly these clients like probably knew where I was coming from too. I think they just knew I was like some freelance dude in the middle of nowhere. And so they weren't exactly like expecting some extreme professionality probably. But I mean, I think I approached the jobs professionally. Just I think they probably thought it was funny that I was maybe trying to look professional with my quotes or invoices or whatever. Versus like maybe being the system they would be normally have. But I guess, I don't know, just to not talk about this for like an hour, I think what happened then is just created this snowball of getting that work seen, having the Nike swoosh on your portfolio at that time. I mean, still today, it's like they're such like a big desirable client to have. So I think having that just led to more of that. And so like I think just the lettering career almost just happened to me because I think like a lot of other people, it just was the zeitgeist of people getting interested in lettering as illustration, and maybe like the tools becoming, I don't know, maybe the tools lending themselves to like being useful for drawing letters. I don't know what it was exactly, but obviously there's like a few people who are probably around my age or came in this earlier days of this that were doing this in different places, like Alex Richet and Jessica Hish and all these people who have probably been around for a similar amount of time or maybe even longer, I don't know, but so I think it just happened at this great time, and there was such like an early enthusiasm for it. Everyone is like excited about crazy typography, and so it was just this really fun thing. And I think getting paid to experiment was just really validating too, in terms of being like, hey, I can do this, I can do different things, and people will see it and recognize it as still something cohesive to me, as opposed to like having to have some defined style that's like always looks like this for people to know who I am. And so I was really excited about it.
I think that, I mean, it doesn't always happen that suddenly after 2 weeks of setting up your freelance practice, you get an assignment from Nike. But there's definitely, and this is not something that I would say I would recommend everyone starting new to just aim for, right? But there's definitely something that you were still putting out there in terms of like you were trying to put your work out there. You were finding new ways, which at the time where Behance was the new way of putting work out there, right? It was in a way innovative and kind of new. And it just brings me back to what you said in the very beginning, this thing of like try to get the most eyes on the work that you're doing, and keep on having interest in what you're doing and keep it experimental for yourself. And you were actually putting those bits of experimentation with typography out there in novel ways or in new ways, right? And I want to go back or actually touch on the moment where you got the Young Guns 2011. Is it a prize? Is it called a prize, or is it you were awarded with the Young Guns 2011? And for those that don't know what it is, this is essentially an award that recognizes the vanguard of creative professionals under 30 and up to 30, right?
Yeah, I think it was 2013, but I think it was the 11th class of Young Guns maybe. So it was like Young Guns 11, but it was in 2013, which is confusing. But yeah. Okay,
so when you got this award, you had been doing lettering for some years already, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I was just wondering what that meant for you, because I mean, and I want to touch on validation here, right? Because there's different ways of getting validation for your work, and definitely there's social media. We touched on that before. There's getting validation from your family or your friends or your colleagues, and having people recognizing the work you do. And prices are a way of validating your work. So I want to ask you, what did that do for you in terms of your career or your own perception of yourself? Do you feel that this, getting that award had an impact on the work you were delivering or the way you were standing in front of the world as an artist?
Wow. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess. I mean, yeah. I think it was one of those things where, again, maybe this is just from where I was coming from. I think my expectations of where I would end up, like who I would work with, whatever, were just never really set in this kind of big global place, right? They were just like, I think back and like looking at books in our college library of like designers, and just like Peter Saville and these people, and you just like, it seemed like another world where you could be someone who in different countries people might know your work or whatever the thing was, and it just wasn't something that ever occurred to me as being a reality or a possibility. And so there were all these moments where I think you sort of like I think in like you see something happening and you sort of like hope it's a possibility, and it feels like cool, and you're like, oh, like it's crazy, and then when it happens you take it in stride because there's just no expectation that it's going to be continuous. Even like the jobs for like Nike and that kind of stuff, I wasn't like, oh cool, I've made it now I'm just going to be doing all this international work, it's going to be so rad. It was just like, okay, I'm going to do this, it's crazy, but I'm sure it's not going to be happening again. And so I think it was like this progressive, just like slight reach, you like and your ambitions grow a little bit, and then you see this thing, and I think Young Guns felt like a little bit where just leading up to it was something I'd always followed, like, well, since I found out about it, and it just felt like, wow, this is crazy. Yeah. Like all these people, to get in this thing, you have to just be at this amazing level, and it's, and so it was like a weird thing where I think, I applied, and then, when it happened, I had hoped it would happen, but like there was never an expectation. It was always like, oh, that's obviously not gonna like happen though. I mean, realistically, but like, it's just kind of that thing of like, well, maybe, I don't know, like maybe I'll just put it out there and who knows. And and so I think it was like, I mean, obviously extremely important and validating. I can't say what it did or didn't do for my career or visibility or whatever. Like, I guess I didn't, I don't see it as like a before and after. I didn't like spend time trying to figure out like what had led from there to where I was or whatever. But I think in terms of those like just progressive steps of being able to be like, I don't know, like maybe confidence not the right word, but just feeling like, there's like that seat at the table. Like you're like, hey, yeah, I can be from Cape Town. I can come from a world that is so separate to this and so not immediately rewarding of it, because I do think the American playground of this, like the economy, just the amount of people doing this stuff here, it's very different, so it's like having achieved some visibility from a place like South Africa feels like there's a lot of validation there where you're like, cool, it's like it says something. And again, I think just so much of what is about like work I had been excited to make, and I think just that someone being like, hey, good job on this thing you liked making, I think always feels nice. I don't know.
What was that? You mentioned the American market and how things work there and how different things were back in South Africa. Was that an initial motivation to years later move to Portland, or was that a result of different or other things in your life?
I mean, a bit. Actually, ironically, I first wanted to move to Germany, and
I just asked this because it turns out that many of the artists that I have conversations with in the podcast, they turned out, they were born somewhere and they moved to some other city, and that that had an impact in their career in some way or another. So I wonder, and there's something there. There's something in the decision of relocating that has to do with, looking to join a different community or a creative community of some sort. So I just wonder, what were your personal motivations to move to Portland from South Africa? Sometimes it turns out that it's just by chance that people move countries, or because their partner relocates and they relocate with them. But I just wanted to know how that happened for you.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both. I think mainly my I guess now wife and I, we would just spend a long time in Cape Town. Cape Town's a small city. South Africa's a small place, and I think we just got to the point where we were like, hey, it'd be rad to like live somewhere else. And like I said, we were first planning to like move to Germany, and we were learning German.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we were going to move to Berlin because we had traveled there, and we were just like so hyped about Berlin as a city. And then I think we, they're just like over a year or two later, but over time, I think we were like, oh, it might be easier to just move somewhere that's mainly English speaking for like work and that kind of thing. Because I think back then,
I can relate.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, I had like most of my client base was in America. I traveled here like a few years before this, and I knew a lot of people here. There's such like an amazing community of illustrators and lettering people and designers out here.
Yeah.
And Portland's just like this really nice city. And so it was just more that, and I applied for this green card, like exceptional skills visa thing, which just took years and years and years to get, and then eventually, it came through, and it'd been like so expensive and so long in the making that we were like, okay, let's just do it, and like see what happens. So it wasn't like necessarily like I was chasing down big opportunities so much as like, hey, like it'd be cool to live somewhere else, and this makes sense. And there's like this industry and community of people for me there, and I think for my wife, who's she's a product manager in tech, so she works in like tech, and so I think it's like a good place for her too. And so it wasn't like trying to like be ambitious and like chase down the big clients, but it was a little more like a fun experiment and an adventure, I guess.
And going back to, I think before you mentioned something about the current work you're doing as a creative director, and kind of like how you decided to, because of relocating and because of finding yourself, working on your own in a new city, trying to find or missing that connection with other people, and you decided to start working as a creative director in a studio, right? So I want to ask you, how was it for you to go from being at the front of what you do, when you are a lettering artist, when you're an artist, an illustrator, you are a little bit like the star, or you are at the front of the work you do. And, as a creative director, I can imagine that right now you oversee bigger projects and more complex projects, but you oftentimes are behind the scenes, right? So you rarely get credit for what you do, or perhaps you get credit within your team, but you don't get that kind of exposure as the artist, as the start of the work, right? So I wanted to ask you how it is to go from that position to a different one in that sense.
Oh my gosh, that's I love it, honestly. It's like my dream. I'm like, I mean, this sounds ironic to say now because I've spent so much time talking about myself, but I'm not someone who likes talking about myself. I'm not someone who likes being in the front and like, being, I guess, the feature of things. And I think, there's a difference, I think, in the world of being celebrated for the stuff you do and the world that started to feel quite toxic, which is like having to turn yourself into a product and a brand in order to continue to be competitive. And I think, that's like the Instagram kind of culture of what we do, and I was getting so tired of that, and it felt so toxic, and it felt like, having to, like, that link between what we do and who we are didn't feel like a good thing to me. It didn't feel like, wow, I'm the star of the show. It just felt like this is a huge burden because I need to commodify and whatever my life, I need to like be on Instagram all the time and posting stuff and making stuff and making sure it gets seen and visibility so I can get the work, so I can do the thing. And so I don't mind at all, honestly. I think I really enjoy just kind of participating in something. I feel no need to be the one getting credit for anything. Honestly, it's not that interesting to me.
And I think it's also, I think you're raising awareness towards something that is super real, which is like you are, oftentimes you become the product of what you do, or you become the product that you are selling, and that's a lot to take, right? And I think it's important to take that distance with your work and understand that, okay, this is even though I love what I do and I really enjoy it, this is work, and it is fine to have your boundaries, and it's fine not to be not to take some distance of that, right? So I want to, before we wrap up the episode, I want to ask you for what would be the two things, if you can name them or you can identify them, what would be two things or attitudes that you feel gave you or made a difference in your career as an artist and designer?
I think one thing is, I mentioned this earlier, I think it's like seeing it as that we are kind of in a service industry. I think for me, empathy is like such a big thing, and this is maybe a bit of a cliche almost at this point, but like, for the same reason I'm not super interested in the work being about me, it's because the work isn't for me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a commercial artist. I think the work I make myself can be about me, but I think realizing that it's a conversation and it's an exchange, and that you're working for somebody, and by extension you're working for a lot of the people that those people are trying to sort of speak to. I think for me that's a big thing, that it has to be an empathy thing. It has to be removing yourself and your ego to some degree from the equation, or at least having that be part of it, not the entire thing. And I think the more you approach work and clients with like humility and empathy, I think, the more you're going to actually do something that is intentionally meaningful for them, not just something that you want to rubber stamp your style onto. And so I think that's a big thing. And then again, I think this maybe like situational awareness of where your strengths lie. I think part of, that journey for me, that audit, is also realizing that, like, hey, I'm maybe not as good at being the person who comes up with the brand new idea anymore. But what I have now is like a reactive creativity where I can, draw on like 15 years of experience to look at things and really understand how to improve them and how to talk about them, and more so than maybe being the one who makes the entire thing myself. And I think just being self-aware is like really useful, because I think it helps you naturally pivot. No career outside of freelancing would you expect to do the same thing until you die, right? Like, you'd expect to like slowly grow and get promotions maybe and do the thing, and eventually you end up in a very different place from where you started. But there's a weird expectation when you're illustrating or whatever that like you start here and then you end here, and that makes no sense, because your skill set does change over time. Your attitude, your mind, your life, everything about it, changes over time. And like, I've made this pivot. I know you've expanded your business too for maybe similar reasons, but I think that's a big thing too. It's just, you don't have to be handcuffed to the idea of being a freelancer and doing one thing forever. You can do so many different things. And
I love that.
I think it's important to open yourself to it.
That's so liberating. It's sort of like you got yourself promoted on your own career path, right? Yes, and I love what you said about What you said before about how working for somebody or doing commercial work for clients is not about you anymore, and that's also a great way of removing yourself from the work, right? And whereas you are a big part of bringing that thing to life, you can still take distance from that thing and understand that you are actually there to help other people with your work. Because I feel that oftentimes as artists we put ourselves in the center, which can be good at times, but at the same time it can be we forget at times that we are here to help other people tell their stories or communicate with their customers, and therefore you need to create, or you need to develop that empathy for the people you're working with, right? And I love that you pointed that out right now. So before we wrap up the episode, I normally play a game with my guests, which is, I don't know if you've ever played this game. It's called Finish the Sentence. So I basically start a sentence and you complete it.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Let's go.
I'm proud of myself because...
Wow. Because, wow, what am I proud of myself for? I think I'm a good partner and to my wife, and I'm trying to be a good person, and I try to be good to people. I don't know.
That's good enough. I'm terrible. I'm terrible at...
Oh, I mean, almost everything. I mean, but I really like being bad at things and learning how to become good at them. It's my new passion, is being an amateur.
Nice. One day I'm going to...
Oh, so I was waiting for more sentence. One day I'm going to probably move to Europe, I guess. Yeah.
Come to Berlin. Come to Berlin.
Yeah. Maybe Berlin.
I'm always chosen first when it comes to...
I think being like a therapist to people, like talking through people's problems with them. I think, I seem to always get into that position, which I like. But yeah.
I couldn't do without...
At this point, probably my dog. I mean, obviously my wife, but like we've got a dog. She's almost 2, and I mean, she's just the most pure thing in the world. So I couldn't do without her, I guess.
And I could never get bored of...
Oh damn! Maybe my dog again.
Nice. Thank you so much, Jordan, for being here today. Where can people find you?
They can't find me. I'm on Instagram, Jordan_Metcalf, but I don't post that often. I guess I'm trying. I try to break the cycle of using Instagram, but I sometimes I'll just post for fun again, which I think was the whole point of things. Maybe I've made something. I've gotten into carving, so I've been posting those a bit. But I guess people can follow me there, but otherwise I don't really like to be found. Or they can find me. I mean, my website too, I guess. Jordan-Metcalf.com.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I should add this to the show notes or not, but
no, you can add it.
Okay, cool. So thank you so much again for being on today's show and sharing all of the things that you have shared about your creative path and all the insights that I'm sure that many of the beginners or people who are just starting with their own creative journeys will benefit from. So thank you so much again for being there, and thank you so much for tuning in, and see you on the next episode of Open Studio. Bye bye.
Thanks so much, Martina. See ya.
So this is it. I hope you loved this episode. You can find me, the host of the show, on social networks at Martina Flor on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you have a question or comments, go to martinaflor.com/podcast, where you can see previous episodes, find show notes, and send voice memos with your comments and questions. You can also watch these episodes on YouTube. Just go to martinaflor.com/YouTube to find them. You can, of course, listen to all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform. If you loved this episode, subscribe to this podcast. And if you leave us a review, it will help others find us. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next episode of Martina Flor's Open Studio. Bye-bye.